As many of you know, I've been experimenting with a different form or a different workflow when I'm out on location. And I think I've almost nailed it, but for one thing, which I hope to do today. So this video really is in three parts. There's a short discussion about ISO. There is also my experimentation with white balance on location. And then I'm going to come back to the computer, load up the images and look at some comparisons of using different white balance. So let me just recap what my old methodology used to be. I used to use just aperture and shutter speed to control the exposure of my image, because I had always set my ISO, as I've been advised many times, to the base ISO, which in my camera is ISO 100. But there were some problems associated with this. And problem number one was being able to get an accurate exposure. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later on the video, but it seriously limited the sort of images that I could take. And it also meant that I would very often have to have the use of a tripod on location. And that of course reduced the flexibility of any composition that I wanted to take. The other factor, relying on ISO 100, meant that I had to rely on good light. It was almost impossible to take images in poor light. And the final problem I had to try and overcome was that the colours in my images very often needed a lot of work in editing, because out of camera they lacked a certain punch, a certain vibrancy, or even clarity. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this on the way to the beach and explain exactly what I'm going to be doing today. When we've left the beach, we'll come back and have a look at some of the images that I captured using different white balance settings. So let's go. So you'll remember that years ago with film, you had a base ASA rating for your film. It had one particular, hesitate to use the word, but sensitivity. And the only way you could control exposure was through your shutter speed and the aperture. And then of course with the advent of digital technology and digital cameras, there was still that base setting that you could use, the ISO setting in your camera, but you also had the opportunity to use different base settings, different ISOs, whatever the shot and whenever you liked. So this opened up the range of exposures that you could use. So for example, if you were having 100 ASA film in your camera, you might be limited to really good light in order to get the correct exposure. But with a digital camera, of course, the story is so much more different. Quite different indeed. You can basically shoot till it's almost dark and still get a well-exposed shot. So at this point I didn't really understand why my photographs lacked any sort of punch and why I couldn't take photographs in a more creative style. And then if you've watched my video about my Mythbuster video about higher ISOs, which I'll put a link to up here, I I began to realise that if I used higher ISOs, then I would be able to take exposures in light that was less than perfect, which of course then led me on to using auto ISO, even though I'm in a landscape or a seascape environment. And then the other day I was playing around with some images on my computer using Lightroom Classic, and I discovered something that really added that additional punch, that additional clarity to the image, which I'd never really considered before. And this is it. So what was it that I hadn't actually considered before? It's very simple when you think about it. White balance. Out in the field, I had never considered white balance. And when I started playing around with some of my images on the computer, adjusting the white balance, I began to realise where in all these years I've been going wrong. So today I'm here experimenting with a new workflow on location, and I'm going to take a variety of shots and see how they turn out. I'm going to be on auto ISO, and I'm going to adjust the white balance in the field using a white card. I have to use a white card because that suits the Sony camera best of all, so that I can set a Kelvin for the shot and take the shot. I'm also going to take a shot using my old settings of the same composition, so that when we get back I can actually make some comparisons. Okay, so I'm going to set this up right now. Okay, I've set up my shot now, which is a sandy beach shot out across the sea towards a headland in the distance, Chapel Point. And I'm going to use a shutter speed, now that the sun's out, of 125, f8 aperture, ISO 100, and the white balance is a preset sunny, sun's out. So let's take that shot, see how that turns out. Okay, the next shot I'm going to do is with auto ISO, and I'm going to set the white balance manually. So I've got my card set up. Right, let's go ahead and take the shot. Typical, the sun's gone in, so I'm going to open up the shutter a little bit. Right, so that was 1/60 of a second, f8, auto ISO, and a set custom white balance. Just going to try a shot over there, more towards the rocks in a little bit of shade. See how that works out. So in this shot, it's a little bit shady, and I'm shooting into shadows underneath the cliff face. Just as I say that, of course, the sun brightens up. It's the trouble with sort of like a sunny spell sort of day, shall we say. Anyway, I've taken my custom Kelvin setting, my custom white balance. I'm on auto ISO, so I'm just going to take this shot. The next shot I'm going to take, I'm going to try and do this at the same shutter speed and the same aperture. So change the ISO to 100. Gosh, that's darkened it immediately. And I'm going to put the white balance onto shade. Now I've immediately noticed, and you'll notice, this is a very dark shot. Not very well exposed at all. In fact, to get a decent exposure, I've actually got to get to 1/30th of a second at f8 ISO 100. So I'm going to take that shot as well. Okay, so there's two shots I've taken, one into a shaded area, which just got a completely different Kelvin, compared with one across the bay. Okay, I'm now going to be shooting against some slaty bluey colour rocks, bit of sand in front into a small cave, so quite a difficult range of colours to cope with. And in this case I'm going to be shooting at 1/30th of a second, f8 ISO 100, and basically a shady white balance. So for my final shot, again it's 1/30th of a second at f8 auto ISO, and I've manually selected the Kelvin using the white card. So here we are again, back at the computer now. It was glorious down on the beach, wasn't it? Beautiful, beautiful. Anyway, I've got the images on the screen now, so we'll have a look at those. I haven't done any processing to them other than anything to do with white balance. So let's have a look at the images, see what we've got. So this is the first shot, and you'll see that I've divided it up into three sections, really to give some sort of comparison between the different white balances that have been set. So on the left I had used the preset daylight, and to be fair it looks a little bit sort of pale. There's not a great deal in terms of colour in that image, not a lot of vibrancy. Saturation yes, but vibrancy might be not so much. And then I had set the camera using the white card at the beach, as you can see in the shot there, and the Kelvin came out at 6350 with a tint of -4, and it looks really quite green, doesn't it? You know, the colours are not particularly realistic, I think. And then on the right hand side you can see what Lightroom Classic has done with white balance. So it's basically ignored completely the white balance set by the camera, and using its own algorithms had decided that the white balance should be set at 6450 Kelvin with a tint of -5, which compared with the preset is still a little bit green for my taste. So I might now actually adjust it. So at this point it's worth understanding that any camera will have its own view of white balance, if you like, you know, have its own understanding, its own measurement for white balance. Likewise, any software that you use will also use its own algorithms to determine that neutral setting of white balance. So you'll find I'm using Lightroom Classic, and that Kelvin setting will probably be quite different from, say, Affinity Photo, for example. So you need to bear that in mind, that the settings that I've got on my screen here and I'm showing you today, they're all relative depending on the software and the camera that you have. So in camera, my 6500 Kelvin will be totally different in your camera, unless of course you're using a Sony Alpha Series 7 R4, when it'll be exactly the same. Anyway, that aside, let's have a look at the next image. So here's the shot which I took into the shadow. So on the preset it was shady on the left hand side, and then I set the camera using the white card, and that came out at 7600 Kelvin plus 16 tint. Lightroom Classic though had a different view. It decided that the white balance Kelvin should be 6,950 and -4. And there's still that little green tint which I'm not too happy about. And the Kelvin that camera had set, gosh, it's really quite magenta, isn't it? It's too much so. And the shady preset, well, that's just a little bit pale. Let's have a look at the next one. So in the final shot of the three, again I used the shady preset. The camera was set at 6,350 Kelvin -4 tint using the white card. But Lightroom Classic decided, yeah, in this case, the Kelvin was very similar at 6,450 with a tint of -5. So there's not a lot of difference to see between the two. So after all that, where does that leave me with my evolving workflow on location? I think you have to sort of almost take white balance. It seems ridiculous, but take a little bit of a pinch of salt, if you like, in a way. And we must always remember that different cameras and different software see white balance quite differently. And I also have to think that there's a difference between shooting in RAW and shooting in JPEG, for example. So with shooting in RAW, perhaps white balance isn't quite so important because you can make those adjustments again in your editing software. Whereas with JPEGs, the white balance is, if you like, baked in by the camera. It uses the camera setting. Now, it's not to say that you can't adjust the white balance in a JPEG. Perhaps you don't have quite the flexibility that you might have with a RAW image. I don't know, it's not something I've looked into. Perhaps if you've thought about it or done some research, you might pop a comment below. So for me, going forward, I think my photography has changed. The way I take photographs has now changed. I will of course use my shutter speed to control motion and my aperture to give me the depth of field that I want. I'm certainly going to continue with auto ISO because I've found that very helpful and it's something that I don't have to worry about. And I think in future, although I said in the past that maybe auto white balance is not quite so accurate maybe, I think I'm going to continue with auto white balance in future because I can easily change it if I need to within Lightroom Classic. That combination now of shutter speed, aperture controlled, auto ISO and auto white balance, I think is opening up a whole new area of creativity for me. And I'm looking forward to trying it out in the future. So that's it, that's all for now, and see you again next time. Bye.